The wind cut like a razor across the ridgeline, but it didn't just howl. It screamed. Like the mountain itself was trying to warn somebody about what was coming. Jedediah Cole felt it in his bones. He pulled his buffalo hide coat tighter, the snow already turning his beard to ice. Out here, you learn to listen to the sounds, not just the ones you could hear, but the ones you could feel. And this felt wrong. He could barely see 5 feet in front of him, just white. An endless, blinding white that erased the whole world. Somewhere in that mess was his horse, Canella, his last link to a life that had been stolen from him. He cupped his hands to his mouth and let out a sharp, low whistle, a sound she always came to. Nothing. Just the wind chewing on the pines and the soft thud of snow falling from branches that couldn't hold any more weight. "Damn it, girl," he muttered, his voice swallowed by the storm. He'd lost her the night before when the blizzard rolled in like a thief, turning the trail into a white hell. He'd barely made it back to his cabin alive. But leaving her out here, that was a different kind of death. That horse was the last thing he had that remembered his wife, Maria. The only piece of her that was still breathing and moving through this world. Jed squinted, his eyes burning from the cold. And then he saw it. Faint dips in the snow. Not just any tracks, hoof prints. He crouched down, brushing away the fresh powder. They were fresh. Canella had headed downhill, toward the river. Smart girl. The underground springs kept parts of it from freezing solid. She'd be looking for water, for warmth. He adjusted the rifle on his shoulder and pushed forward, his legs on fire with every step into the deep drifts. But then he saw the second set of prints, and every hair on his neck stood straight up. They were human, and they were barefoot. He blinked hard, thinking the blinding snow was playing tricks on him. But they were real. Small, delicate prints, staggering unevenly through the snow. The steps were short, panicked. Someone had been running, or falling. "Who, in God's name," he whispered, "walks barefoot in a blizzard?" A cold dread coiled in his gut. This wasn't the cold of the mountain. This was older, deeper. It was the feeling he got right before things went bad. He'd felt it enough times to know its name. Then his eyes locked on a shape under a weeping willow near the riverbank. It wasn't a rock. It was too smooth, too deliberate. A mound of snow that just didn't belong. Jed moved toward it slowly, his rifle held ready. He knelt beside the shape, his gloved hands brushing back the layers of white. A flash of red fabric. Woven. He froze. It was a blanket, tribal made, worn but beautiful, with faded crimson and deep blue patterns. He knew that weave. Maria had spent years studying them. Apache. He pulled back more snow, and a hand appeared, small, bronze-skinned, and cold as marble. "God Almighty," he breathed. Beneath the blanket was a young woman, maybe 20. Her long black hair was frozen to her face like wet silk. Her lips were blue, her eyes were closed. She was barefoot, and her feet were bleeding. Her traditional clothes were torn, ripped like she'd clawed her way through thick brush, or been dragged. Jed dropped his rifle. He pressed his ear to her chest, praying, a heartbeat. Faint, shaky, but it was there. He didn't think, he just acted. He bundled her tighter in the Apache blanket, scooped her into his arms. She was so light, lighter than a sack of grain. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice rough. "Don't you die on me, not out here." He gave another sharp whistle, long and desperate this time, and from the tree line, a soft whinny answered. Canella trotted out of the white haze like a ghost, steam puffing from her nostrils. She came right to him, nudging his shoulder as if to say, "What took you so long?" Jed shook his head, already strapping the girl onto the saddle before climbing up behind her, holding her tight against his chest. "We'll settle up later," he muttered to the horse. "Right now, we've got work to do." The ride back was a blur of white and pain. The snow was like needles against his eyes. The girl in his arms was a block of ice, even wrapped in the blanket and held against his body. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. But every few minutes he thought he felt the faintest flutter of breath against his chest. He kept talking to her, whispering nonsense, anything to anchor her here. "Not today, girl. You stay with me. You hear me? Not today." The cabin finally appeared through the storm like a half-forgotten dream. A crooked roof and a chimney coughing smoke. He slid off the horse, carried her inside, and kicked the door shut against the screaming wind. It was barely warmer inside. The fire was almost dead. He laid her gently near the hearth, threw logs into the stove, and sparked a fresh flame. It caught fast, the fire licking at the dry wood like it was starving. Come on," he murmured. He carefully stripped off her wet, torn clothes, wrapping her in every dry blanket he owned. He even pulled out one of Maria's old wool throws, one he hadn't touched in years. He brewed tea with willow bark for the fever he knew was coming, just like Maria's grandmother had taught him. He gently spooned a few drops between the girl's blue lips. At first, nothing. Her throat didn't even twitch. He tried again. Then, a swallow. A real one. A faint flush of color, barely there but real, bloomed on her cheeks. Jed let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for a lifetime. His knees went weak. He slumped back against the wall and just watched her breathe. If she dies here, he thought, a part of me dies with her, even if my body keeps walking around. The storm howled through the night, a wild animal clawing at the cabin walls. Jed stayed by her side, drifting in and out of a light, restless sleep. Once, she stirred. Her eyes flew open, but they were wild, unfocused. She was seeing something else, something that wasn't in the room. Her mouth moved, forming words in a language he didn't know. She clutched the blanket like it was a shield, her eyes wide with a terror so deep it made his own blood run cold. She had seen the devil, and she had outrun him. Barely. He didn't touch her. He just whispered, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now. Ain't no one here but us." Eventually, her eyes closed again, and she fell into a fitful sleep. Jed threw another log on the fire, staring at her face in the flickering light. Who was she? Why was she out there alone, barefoot, running for her life in a killer storm? He stood and walked to the small window, sipping cold tea. He thought of Maria. He thought of all the lives he'd seen taken by men who wanted power more than they wanted peace. He thought of this girl on his floor, fighting for her life without a name, without a voice. And then he heard it. Somewhere deep in the forest, a sound pierced the howl of the wind. It was long, low, and hollow. A horn, a tribal horn. Jed's hand went straight to his rifle. That sound meant someone was coming, and he was damn sure they weren't looking for him. The horn sounded again just before dawn, closer this time. Jed stood frozen by the window, rifle in his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. It had been years since he'd heard a sound like that, but some things you never forget. It wasn't a war cry, not yet. It was a signal, a call, for a hunt. He moved away from the window and looked down at the girl. She was still curled near the fire, her breathing deeper now, more even. Her lips had a human color again. She clutched that tribal blanket like it was the only thing holding her to this world. Jed crouched beside her and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes shot open. Pure, animal terror. She scrambled backward, knocking over the pot of tea, her back hitting the stone hearth. Her eyes darted around, looking for a weapon, for an escape. "Easy," Jed said, holding his hands up, palms out. "You're safe." She blinked, the terror slowly fading into confusion. She didn't speak. "You were out cold," he tried again. "I found you by the river. You almost froze to death." Her eyes scanned the room, taking in every shadow, the single cot, the heavy wooden door. Do you understand me? Jed asked. She didn't nod, but the trembling in her hands lessened. He stood up and took a step back, giving her space. Name's Jedediah Cole. Folks call me Jed. Silence. Then, in a rough, dry whisper, she said a single word. Sheila. He paused. Is that your name? She gave one sharp nod, just one. All right, Sheila, Jed said softly. You're in my cabin. It ain't much, but it's warm, and you don't have to be scared. A long silence stretched between them. Her gaze kept returning to the door. I ain't stopping you if you want to leave, Jed said, watching her eyes. But there's 3 feet of snow out there. No trails. You won't make it half a mile. Still, she said nothing. Jed leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Who's looking for you, Sheila? Her jaw clenched tight. He tried a different way. That horn. That's tribal, ain't it? They blowing that for you? She flinched. It was just a flicker in her eyes, but it was enough. You in trouble? He asked. More silence. Jed pushed off the wall and knelt by the hearth to pour another cup of tea. He placed it on the floor in front of her, not pushing it on her, just offering. She waited a long time before her hand snaked out and grabbed it. Her fingers still shook. Jed spoke again, his voice steady. I don't need to know the whole story. I just need to know if someone's going to come here and try to kill me for helping you. This time, she answered. Her voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. No. Then who are they coming for? A pause. Me. Jed took that in. He nodded once. Figures. She looked up at him, her brow furrowed with suspicion. Why? Jed shrugged. You show up in a blizzard with no shoes, half dead, wearing what looks like ceremonial clothes. That ain't just a run of bad luck. Somebody out there wants you back, and they don't care if you're breathing when they get you. She said nothing, but her eyes, for the first time, held something other than fear. Pain, deeper than any bruise. Jed took a step closer. I've seen women brought back before. Dragged. Broken. It ain't hard to tell when someone's running to live. He'd do this to you? Jed asked quietly. The man blowing that horn? She looked away. She closed her eyes and something inside her seemed to crack. I would rather freeze to death with my own name, she whispered, than live warm with his. The room went still. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Jed felt something tighten in his chest, something heavy he hadn't let himself feel since Maria was gone. He nodded slowly. Then you did the right thing coming here. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Not with fear, but with a flicker of something else. Recognition, maybe. Jed turned to the stove and started gathering supplies. Dried meat, bullets, a second water skin. I can keep you hidden for a bit, he said, not looking at her. But once they figure out which way you ran, they'll come. Men like that don't give up. She stayed quiet. He glanced over his shoulder. I need to know one thing. This man, he a chief? Some kind of leader? Her voice was barely a whisper. Red Elk. Jed froze. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't heard it in years, not since the war raids, but it was a name that still lived in the corners of every scout's nightmares. He's still alive? She nodded. Once, he was to be my husband, a symbol to bind the tribes. She paused, her voice hardening. I am the daughter of the moon shaman. He thinks if he possesses me, the tribes will follow him. Jed muttered a curse under his breath. He knew exactly how that story ended. You got people still loyal to your father? She shrugged. Some. Others think I shamed my people by running. And you think you can go back? Her jaw tightened. He nodded. Didn't think so. They sat in the quiet of the cabin, the wind pressing against the walls. Finally, Sheila spoke. They'll send more than just warriors. They'll send hunters, mercenaries. I figured, Jed said. Then came a sound, not a knock, a crunch, the sound of heavy boots in the snow, just off the porch. Sheila went tense, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Jed moved silently to the door, his rifle in his hand. He pressed his ear against the cold wood. No voices, just the soft creak of someone shifting their weight. He glanced back at her. "Back room, now." She didn't argue. She disappeared into the shadows. He cracked the door open, just a sliver, and peered out. A man stood in the swirling snow, pale, with a long coat and a hat pulled low. Not tribal, not military, a bounty hunter, the kind that worked for anyone with enough coin. "Name's Lam," the man called out, his voice smooth and cold. "Don't mean no harm. Just got a question for you." Jed didn't move. "Heard you might have seen a girl. Young. Might be hurt. Might be with someone who thought they were being helpful." Jed stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held low but ready. "Don't know what you're talking about." Lam smiled. It was all teeth and no warmth. "That's so." His eyes flickered past Jed toward the cabin door. "Storm's getting worse," Jed said, his voice flat. "You'd best be on your way." The bounty hunter tipped his hat. "I'll be back," he said, his smile widening. "I always find what I'm owed." Jed watched him disappear into the trees, a ghost in the white. Then he slipped back inside and bolted the door. Sheila emerged from the back room, her eyes full of questions she didn't need to ask. Jed looked at her, his jaw set like stone. "We run now," he said, "or we bleed later. Your call." The smoke from the cabin chimney was the last thing to disappear. A thin, gray trail curling up into the pines, swallowed by the endless white. By nightfall, there would be nothing left. No tracks, no warmth, just snow and silence. Sheila rode ahead on Canella, wrapped in layers of wool and fur. She didn't look back. Neither did Jed. They moved fast, sticking to the ridge lines where the wind would cover their tracks and the trees would hide them from view. Every few minutes, Jed would rein in his own horse, listening. Listening for the snap of a branch, the crunch of snow, the distant echo of a horn. He heard nothing. But Jed had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous wolves are the ones you can't hear. They were circling. He knew it. At a narrow crossing over a frozen creek, Sheila slid off Canella and crouched by the water's edge. Jed joined her. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were scanning the forest on the other side of the creek. "There's a place," she said, her voice low. "A day's ride south of here, a rock face shaped like a raven's wing. We follow this dry riverbed, then we climb. There's a cave. It's safe." Jed nodded. "You know the way?" "I lived there one winter, when the sickness came. My father sent me away to keep me safe." Jed studied her face. "You trust it's still there?" "I trust the land," she said, "more than I trust people." He liked that answer. They rode on as the storm broke, leaving behind a sky so clear and a cold so sharp it felt like breathing glass. Around noon, they stopped to rest under the shelter of a cliff face. Jed built a small, smokeless fire behind a pile of fallen rocks. Sheila ate her share of dried meat in silence. "Tell me more about this red elk," Jed said, his eyes on the flames. "I knew the name back during the raids. Thought he was long dead." "He should be," she muttered. "He wasn't always like this. He fought for our people once. Then he started fighting only for himself." Jed looked up. "And your father? He just let this marriage happen?" Her voice turned to ice. "My father is sick, dying. The Council of Elders makes the decisions now, elders who are old and afraid of war. Red Elk promised them unity. What he meant was power." "And you?" Jed asked. "What did you promise?" Sheila's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw not just fear, but fire. "To live," she said. She stood up and walked to the edge of the tree line. The conversation was over. They made camp low that night in a deep canyon where the moonlight couldn't find them. Sheila curled up close to the fire, her face half in shadow, half lit by the dancing flames. Jed sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. "They'll come for you again," he said quietly. "Not just Red Elk's men. That bounty hunter, Lamb, he's a tracker. He won't give up." Sheila poked at the fire with a stick. "They think I'm a symbol, a thing to be owned." "You ain't," Jed said flatly. She glanced over at him. "Why are you helping me?" He looked up, his eyes tired, older than his years. "Same reason you ran. Some things just ain't right." A beat of quiet passed between them. Then she asked softly, "Did you ever lose someone?" Jed let out a slow breath. "My wife, Maria." "What happened?" "Wrong place, wrong time. A white militia ambushed a Navajo camp they thought was hostile. She was bringing them medicine. They shot her. Said it was a mistake. Said they thought she was one of them. They never even asked her name." Sheila stared into the fire. "I'm sorry." "So am I," he said. Neither of them spoke after that. The night swallowed the rest of their words. By midday the next day, they reached the dry riverbed. Jagged rocks, twisted like the bones of ancient giants, carved a path through the landscape. The wind howled through the canyon. "The Raven's Wing Rock is just ahead," Sheila said. "We'll be there before nightfall." But Jed's gut tightened. Something was wrong. The air was too still, no birds, no sound at all. He raised a hand, stopping her. "What is it?" she whispered. Jed scanned the ridges above them. "Too quiet." Then he heard it, the snap of a single twig. "Down!" he yelled. A shot rang out, the sound cracking against the stone walls of the canyon. The bullet hit the rock right where Jed's head had been a second before. He rolled behind a boulder, his rifle already up and aimed. Sheila dove for cover, drawing the long knife Jed had given her. Two figures appeared on the ridge. More bounty hunters, not Lam. These two were dirtier, sloppier, but they were armed. One had a bandana over his face, the other carried a sawed-off shotgun. "Hand over the girl!" one of them shouted. "You can walk away clean!" Jed's voice was hard as iron. "Come and take her!" The fight was fast, brutal, and ugly. Jed fired once, the bullet grazing the shotgun man's shoulder. Sheila moved like a shadow, darting between the rocks and into the trees. Jed followed, laying down cover fire. Then he heard a scream. It wasn't Sheila's. He reached a small clearing and saw the bandana-faced hunter pinned to the ground. Sheila was on top of him, the knife held to his throat, her eyes blazing with a fire Jed had never seen before. Jed approached slowly. "You good?" She didn't answer. "Sheila," he said, his voice gentle. Her hand was trembling, but she pulled the knife back. The man gasped, clutching at his neck, and scrambled away like a kicked dog. Jed let him go. Sheila stood up, breathing hard. There was blood on her hands. It wasn't hers. "It was me or him," she said, her voice cracking. Jed nodded. "You picked right." She looked at him then, her eyes wide and wild. I've never killed before." "You didn't," Jed said. "But next time you might have to." She didn't argue. They moved on, slower now, every shadow a potential threat. By nightfall, they reached the base of the Raven's Wing. It was a massive slab of rock that jutted out over the cliffs like a blade. A narrow path twisted up behind it. Sheila led the way. Inside the cave, they lit a small fire. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Jed cleaned the blood off her knife. Sheila just stared at her hands. Then she whispered, so low he almost didn't hear it. "The world burns quietest in the snow." Jed looked at her. "What did you say?" She didn't repeat it, but he'd heard it. The fire crackled. The wind picked up outside, and then came a whistle. Short and sharp, from down on the trail below. Jed was on his feet in an instant, rifle in his hand. He moved to the mouth of the cave and peered down. Someone was approaching on horseback. A single rider moving slowly. He was covered in ceremonial war paint. This wasn't a bounty hunter. This wasn't a stranger. Jed turned back to Sheila. "You know him?" She rose slowly, her lips parted. "Yes," she said. "His name is Chessa. Friend or foe?" "That," she said, her eyes fixed on the approaching rider. "Depends on how long he's been waiting." Jed's grip tightened on his rifle. "Guess we're about to find out." Chessa dismounted before he reached the firelight, his war paint streaked from the wind and the long ride. He didn't call out, he just walked the last few steps, slow and deliberate until he stood at the edge of the light. Jed didn't lower his rifle. Sheila stepped forward. Her voice was tired, but steady. "He won't shoot you, Chessa, unless you give him a reason." Chessa's eyes didn't flinch. "You look older, Sheila." "You look like hell," she replied. Jed watched them, his finger resting on the trigger. "You two going to talk all night, or should I keep aiming?" Chessa turned his gaze on Jed. He measured him, took in the rifle, the hard lines on his face. "He is the one who pulled you from the snow." It wasn't a question. Sheila nodded. "He's the only reason I'm standing here." Chessa gave a small grunt. It might have been respect. It might have been exhaustion. "Then I don't aim to fight him." Jed slowly lowered the rifle, but he didn't relax. Chessa moved closer to the fire. He unwrapped a bundle from his saddlebag, dried meat, a fresh water skin, and a small pouch of healing herbs. He handed them to Sheila. She accepted them, not like a gift, but like a formal offering between two chiefs. "How did you find us?" Jed asked. Chessa didn't look at him. He spoke to Sheila. "Red Elk put a bounty out, not just to the white hunters. He called in blood debts from old allies. He told them you fled justice, that you shamed your lineage." Sheila's jaw tightened. "And you believed him?" "I believed your father," Chessa said, "but he is gone now. The council burns his body tonight." Sheila sat down hard, as if her legs had suddenly forgotten how to hold her. The firelight flickered in her eyes, but she was seeing something else entirely. "Was he in pain?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Chessa nodded. "They say he sang until his last breath left him." She turned her face away from the fire, into the shadows. Jed took the knife from his belt and began to slice the dried meat, giving them something to focus on besides the grief that hung heavy in the air. "What about the council?" Jed asked. "They are divided," Chessa said. "Some want war, others want peace at any cost. Red Elk promises them strength. You," he said, looking at Sheila, "offer them a memory." Sheila looked up sharply. "I offer them nothing. I ran." "You survived," Chessa corrected her. "They are not the same thing." A heavy silence settled over the small cave. Then Chessa added, "There is a place where you can still speak, a place to challenge the marriage, but it must be done before the next moonrise. On sacred ground." Jed glanced at Sheila. "Sounds like an ambush." "It might be," she admitted. "But it is also the only way to stop this." Chessa met her eyes. "You are still the daughter of the Moon Shaman. That name still carries weight. For now." Jed stood up and walked to the mouth of the cave. He needed air that didn't taste like history and death. He looked out at the stars, cold and distant in the black sky. Sheila joined him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I don't know if I can face them." "You don't have to," Jed said. "We can keep running, find a new place, survive." She shook her head. "Survival without dignity is not freedom." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "Peace isn't about forgiveness," he said quietly. "It's about surrendering to quieter ghosts." Sheila turned her head, her profile sharp against the night sky. "Then maybe I have been surrendering for too long." Behind them, Chessa stirred. "We should ride tonight. If we wait, Red Elk's men will block the paths. You will have no voice left." Sheila nodded. Jed packed their few supplies in silence. He didn't ask if he was welcome on this part of the journey. He knew it didn't matter. He was in this now, whether he liked it or not. As they rode down from the cliff, the air grew warmer, the stars sharper. The land felt different here, heavier, as if the bones of the ancestors buried beneath it were watching them pass. By dawn, they reached a low mesa surrounded by ancient stone markers. It was a sacred place, quiet and haunting. Smoke curled from a central lodge where the elders were already waiting. As they approached, Chessa held up a hand, signaling for Jed to stop. "This part is hers alone. You do not go in unless they call for you." Jed dismounted and watched as Sheila walked toward the circle of elders. Her shoulders were squared, but he could see how hard she was breathing. She didn't look back. Inside the lodge, the elders rose, men and women with faces like carved wood. No one spoke. Then a woman stepped out of the shadows. Jed recognized her type instantly, a warrior, and one still loyal to Red Elk. "You dare to return?" the woman said, her voice like flint striking steel. "You who turned your back on your people?" Sheila didn't flinch. "I turned my back on slavery. There is a difference." The woman sneered. "You bring a white man with a rifle to our sacred ground. You bring bloodshed." "I bring the truth," Sheila replied. "The only thing Red Elk has ever feared." A murmur went through the room, some angry, some curious. The woman stepped closer until she was inches from Sheila's face. "You left us when we needed you most. And you followed a man who would burn our past to build himself a throne." It would have come to blows, but the head elder, an old woman with eyes like river stones, raised her hand. Enough. Everyone fell silent. "You will speak your challenge before the next fire dies," the elder said to Sheila, "and you will bring a witness to your claims." Sheila turned and walked out of the lodge. Her face was pale and drained. She met Jed's eyes. "They want proof," she said. "You want to run?" he asked. She shook her head. "I want to end this." He gave a single sharp nod. "Then we'll find someone who remembers who Red Elk really is, someone who hasn't choked on his lies." "But what if there is no one left?" she whispered. Jed looked out at the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to burn away the morning mist. "Then we remind them." A faint smile touched her lips. Not of joy, but of resolve. And somewhere behind them, deep in the hills, the sound of hoofbeats echoed. The past was catching up, but this time they weren't running from it. They were riding to meet it. They left the mesa under a sky the color of rust, the dawn bleeding into the cold bones of the desert. The council had given Sheila one day to find proof, one day to find a witness, and then judgment. Jed rode beside her, the silence between them as vast as the landscape. Chessa rode ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the trail for an ambush. The tension was a living thing, riding with them like a fourth horseman. The path twisted through dry gulches and narrow passes. Crows circled high above, silent and watchful. "They're testing us," Sheila finally said, her voice low. "The council. They're watching to see who we bring back, how we carry ourselves." Jed nodded. "It's not just what you say. It's how you stand when you say it." She glanced at him. "You've stood in front of judges before." He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The kind that carry rifles, yeah." They reached a split in the canyon just before noon. Chessa raised a fist, and they halted. "Tracks," he said. "4 horses. Fresh." Jed swung down from his horse and knelt by the trail. The imprints were deep, spaced wide apart. They'd been riding hard, in pursuit. "Not from the village," Chessa added. "These are private riders. Could be Lam's crew, could be worse." Jed stood up, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. "Doesn't matter who they are. If they're standing between us and the truth, we handle it." Sheila looked at him, her brow furrowed. "Are you ready to kill for this?" Jed didn't blink. Freedom that doesn't have to be fought for is just another kind of prison. They pressed forward, riding closer together now, their eyes scanning every rock, every ridge. In the afternoon, the trail narrowed, squeezing them between two towering walls of red rock. That's when the ambush hit. The first shot cracked against the rock right beside Chessa's head. He ducked, his horse rearing in panic. Jed was off his own horse in an instant, rolling behind a boulder, his rifle already in his hand. Sheila hit the ground and crawled for cover. 3 men emerged from the rocks above them. They wore dust-colored coats and carried long guns. Mercenaries. Not clean, not tribal. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you," one of them shouted. Jed fired once. The bullet clipped the man's thigh and he fell back with a curse. Chessa returned fire from his position, forcing another one to drop his rifle and scramble for cover. Sheila crouched behind Jed, her heart pounding against her ribs, her hand clutching the knife he'd given her. Jed turned to her. "Can you run?" She shook her head. "Not yet." Another shot tore through the air, grazing Jed's shoulder. He grunted in pain, rolled to his left and returned fire. Then he heard footsteps, fast, coming from behind them. A 4th attacker had circled around the rocks. He was rushing straight for Sheila. She turned just in time. Instinct took over. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, one quick, fluid motion. The knife went into the man's chest, not deep, but enough. He reeled back, stunned, a look of surprise on his face. Sheila was already on her feet. She kicked him hard in the chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. Jed fired again, a clean shot. The second man fell. The rest of them scattered, melting back into the rocks. Silence descended on the canyon, broken only by the echo of the last gunshot. Jed stood up slowly, wincing as he touched his bleeding arm. He turned to Sheila. She was staring at her hands. There was blood on her fingers. Her wrist was shaking. "I didn't think," she whispered. "I just—" "You lived," Jed said. "That's the point." She looked up at him. "It felt like something inside of me changed. It did." Chessa rejoined them, quickly checking Jed's wound. "It's not deep. You'll live." Sheila didn't say anything else. She just wiped her bloody hands on the dirt, turned, and started walking toward the narrow pass ahead of them. "Let's finish this," she said. By dusk, they reached the outer rim of an abandoned settlement. Old wooden posts leaned like forgotten prayers. A circle of stone fire pits sat cold and silent. "This place meant something once," Chessa said. "It still does," Sheila replied. In the center of the settlement stood a single, weathered pole, draped with faded ribbons, a memorial to her father's teachings. "He brought me here when I was a girl," she said, her voice soft. "He taught me the names of the stars, the names of the spirits. He told me that the land remembers everything." Jed stepped forward. "Does it remember Red Elk?" She nodded. "This is where he made his first promise. To fight for balance, not for power. That promise was broken here too." They began to search the grounds, looking for anything that could prove Red Elk's betrayal. They found it buried beneath the stones of the central fire pit. A bundle of old parchments, wrapped in oilskin. Letters, marks of trade, documents showing Red Elk's secret deals with white fur traders, even with army scouts. He had traded safe passage through tribal lands for rifles and gold. "He sold us out," Sheila whispered, her voice shaking with rage, "long before the marriage." Jed stood beside her. "Now you have your proof." "It's not enough," she said. "There has to be a witness, someone who saw it happen." Chessa looked up, his eyes scanning the northern hills. "Amos." Jed raised an eyebrow. "You think he's still alive?" Chessa nodded. "He lives north of here, near the Devil's Elbow. He keeps to himself. But he was there. He saw the trade happen years ago. He was a cavalry scout. Then he walked away from it all." Jed glanced at Sheila. "You trust him?" "I trust anyone who walked away from that kind of blood." Sheila carefully folded the letters and tucked them into her satchel. Then we ride. They made camp that night under a rocky overhang, the stars spilling across the black sky like scattered coals. Sheila sat alone for a long time, her fingers tracing the outlines of the folded parchments. Jed came and sat beside her in the dust. "You did good today," he said. "I killed a man. You saved your own life." She didn't answer for a long time. Then finally she said, "The first time Red Elk touched me, he said that I was a part of the land now, that my breath was no longer my own." Jed's jaw tightened. She added, "I think he was wrong. Dead wrong." She met his eyes, and the fire in them was burning brighter than ever. "I don't want to be saved anymore, Jed." "Then what do you want?" "I want to fight, and I want to still be me when it's over." Jed looked out at the dark horizon. "Then let's go find the one man who remembers Red Elk before he decided to burn the whole map." As the dawn broke, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from the east. The signal fires had been lit. The council was preparing for the trial, and Red Elk was already gathering his army. The wind wasn't just cold as they crossed into the basin near Devil's Elbow, it was tense. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath. The few trees that grew here were bent and twisted, leaning away from the constant wind. The air smelled of ash and iron. It was a dead place. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of their horses' hooves on the brittle grass. Jed scanned the horizon. "You sure he's out here?" Chessa pointed to a ridge marked by the jagged trunk of a tree that had been split by lightning. "That's the marker. Amos lives in the canyon just below it." Sheila kept her eyes forward. She hadn't said much since the ambush. The shaking in her hands had finally stopped that morning, but she was wrapped in a new, deeper silence. As they approached the head of the trail, Chessa dismounted. "We go the rest of the way on foot. His traps don't miss." Jed raised an eyebrow. "Friendly old fella, huh?" Chessa almost smiled. "He trusts no one. That's why he's still alive." They left the horses tethered and climbed down a narrow stone path that seemed to disappear if you looked at it for too long. Below them, the canyon opened into a small clearing. There was a half-buried wagon, the bones of old campfires, and a rusted rifle leaning against a boulder. Then came the click. Jed froze. He looked down and saw the tripwire, thin as a spider's web, pulled taut against his boot. "Step back slow," a voice rasped from the rocks above them. Jed did exactly as he was told. An old man emerged from behind the rocks. He was wrapped in wool, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes the color of gunmetal. His rifle was aimed right at Jed's heart. "I count 3 of you," he said, "but I only see 2. Chessa held up his hands. "Amos, it's me." The old man squinted. "You bring war to my doorstep, Chessa." "No," Sheila said, stepping out from behind Jed. "We bring the truth." Amos studied her for a long moment. Then he lowered his rifle. "Huh, you're her." Jed let out a slow breath. "So you've heard," Sheila said. "I was there before Red Elk had a name worth spitting," Amos said. He gestured to a tree stump with the barrel of his rifle. "Come on, then. Let's talk before whoever was following you decides to turn this canyon red." They sat in a rough circle near a cold fire pit. Amos poured hot water from a blackened pot into 3 tin cups. He added a bitter root that turned the water dark and smoky. "You looking for a story?" Amos said. "Or a war?" "Both," Sheila replied. "But I'd rather start with the truth." He looked her over. "You got her eyes, your mother's. That woman could freeze a man in his boots with a single look." "She died in peace," Sheila said softly. Amos nodded. "Better than most get." He leaned forward, his gunmetal eyes locking onto hers. "I was with Red Elk the day he signed that deal. Traded safe passage for 3 of our own villages. Didn't even blink. Said it was a necessary sacrifice to survive." Jed frowned. You were a cavalry scout? For a time, Amos replied. Thought I could help keep the peace, but peace that comes with a price tag is just quiet bloodshed. Sheila pulled the letters from her satchel and laid them on the ground between them. These prove the trade, but I need a voice that the council will respect. Amos picked up the papers but didn't read them. He already knew what they said. You already have that. Jed looked at him. You'll testify? Amos nodded. I've buried the truth long enough. He leaned back and said almost to himself, A man doesn't outrun his shame. He just gets better at hiding from it. The fire popped once, as if in agreement. Amos stood up. We'll leave before dark. They'll be expecting you to bring something back. Might as well be the old bones of the man who watched it all burn. They packed quickly, a new sense of urgency driving them. Chessa doubled back to check their trail. We're clean for now, he said. But as the sun dipped low, shadows moved on the horizon. Riders, at least 5 of them. Jed saw them first. Company. They were on their horses in an instant, racing west as the canyon walls narrowed behind them. The thunder of hoofbeats closed in like an approaching storm. Chessa dropped back, firing arrows to cover their trail. Jed rode beside Amos, shielding the old man with his own body. Sheila rode ahead, her eyes burning with focus, leading them through the treacherous terrain. The first shot came just as the stars were beginning to appear. It missed, but it was close. Jed turned in his saddle and fired back. One of the riders went down, the others pressed on. Sheila suddenly veered her horse off the main trail, leading them toward a hidden ravine. Jed followed without question, trusting her instinct. Chessa joined them from the ridge above, cutting off a second rider with a single, well-aimed arrow. They plunged into the narrow gulch and dismounted, their horses lathered and trembling. Jed and Chessa pulled fallen branches over the entrance to hide them. They crouched low in the darkness, rifles aimed, their breaths shallow. The riders thundered past the mouth of the ravine, blind to their hiding place. Silence returned. Jed leaned back against the cold rock wall, breathing hard. They'll double back. Chessa nodded. We need to move. Now. They rode through the night, arriving at the edge of the council lands just as the first light of dawn touched the sky. Signal fires burned on 3 peaks, one for each of the allied tribes. The gathering was beginning. They tethered their horses behind the old ceremonial lodge. Sheila helped Amos down, steadying his shaking hands. The old man looked even thinner than he had before the long ride. You sure about this? She asked him. Amos looked toward the firelight of the council grounds. A man's last words matter more than his first. Inside the council ring, dozens of people had already gathered. Elders, warriors, women, children. The air smelled of sage and ash. And at the center of it all stood Red Elk. He was taller than most, broad-shouldered, his face painted in thick black lines. He wore a wolfskin cloak, and when he turned, his eyes met Sheila's across the crowd. He wasn't surprised. He smiled. Look who has found her courage. Sheila stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. I never lost it. You just tried to bury it. Red Elk chuckled. You have brought ghosts to speak for you. Jed stepped up behind her. Better ghosts than devils. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chessa helped Amos into the center of the circle. Red Elk's smile vanished. Amos, he said, his voice laced with venom. You have no place here. I helped build this circle before you were old enough to stand in it, Amos replied. And just like that, the balance shifted. Amos unrolled the parchments. Sheila stood tall beside him. Jed watched the faces in the council. Some were stunned, some were angry, some were ashamed. And Red Elk? His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. As the sun rose higher, the head elder raised her staff. We hear the challenge, she said, her voice echoing across the silent gathering. Let the testimony begin. The trial had started. But Jed knew the truth wasn't always enough to win a fight, because men like Red Elk don't fight fair, and the moment you threaten their pride, they start bleeding war. The lodge walls held the heat of the morning sun, but the air inside felt like stone, cold, heavy, and waiting to break. Amos stood before the council, his voice rough with age but as steady as the mountains. "I was there," he said, "when Red Elk traded the names of our people for gold. I saw the marks on the paper. I saw the men he dealt with. He sold our safety and bought our silence." Red Elk laughed. It was a loud, bitter sound. "You speak like a man who has been forgotten. They exiled you, Amos." "They exiled my hope," Amos snapped back. "Not my memory." Sheila stepped forward. "The council must decide," she said, her voice ringing with a new strength, "if loyalty means silence or if it means justice." The lead elder, a woman wrapped in ceremonial blue, raised her hand. "The council has heard your words, but words are not wounds. Where is the blood?" Chesa stepped into the circle, his bow and quiver on his back. "You want proof of harm? Half the families in the Northern Territories live under the threat of raids because of a deal they never saw, a promise they never made." Jed could feel the temperature in the lodge shifting, not from the fire, but from the crowd. Some people were nodding, others were glaring. Red Elk stood in the center of it all like a warlord, unshaken, his feet planted wide. Every inch of him screamed, "This is already mine." "Enough stories," he boomed. "Let her step into the circle. Let tradition decide." Sheila's eyes narrowed. "You want a trial of standing?" Red Elk smiled. "If your truth stands taller than mine, let the spirits be our judge." Jed leaned in close to Chesa. "What's a trial of standing?" "It's an ancient rite," Chesa whispered. "Two truths face off. The one who stands last wins. It's not always clean." Jed's jaw tightened. "It's not a trial, it's bait." But Sheila was already moving forward. "I accept." Gasps echoed through the lodge. The council murmured amongst themselves. The elder raised her staff. Let the circle be cleared. Within moments, the lodge was empty except for the elders, seated in a ring, drummers at each of the four directions, and Red Elk, who was already removing his wolfskin cloak. Sheila remained still. Jed stepped toward her. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low. "You've already proven your point." Her voice was steady. "I'm not proving anything. I'm reclaiming it." He looked at her then, and he saw the steel beneath her scars, the fire behind her silence. "If you go down, he wins everything," Jed warned. "I won't go down," she said, her eyes locked on Red Elk across the circle. "I am not the girl who ran." The drums began, a slow, primal beat that echoed like a heartbeat in a deep canyon. Red Elk circled her first, drawing a long, bone-handled knife from his belt. Sheila didn't move. Jed's breath caught in his throat. He could see the trap. Red Elk would taunt her, press her, force her to strike first. And the moment she did, he would claim she had attacked him, that her challenge was false. But Sheila just stood there, her hands at her sides, not weak, unmoved. Red Elk approached, circling her like a wolf. "You speak of freedom," he snarled. "But what will you do with it? Burn our people from the inside out with your new ideas?" Sheila said nothing. Red Elk's eyes narrowed. "You do not have your father's strength. You have your mother's softness, and softness dies in the cold." Still, she didn't flinch. Jed whispered to himself, "Don't let him break your silence. That's what he wants." Then, suddenly, Red Elk lunged, not with the knife, but with his words. "She begged me, that last night. Your mother, she begged me to spare you." Sheila's eyes flickered. Just for a second. It was enough for him. He stepped closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "She knew you would be nothing. A leaf in the storm." Jed reached for his rifle. Chessa grabbed his arm. If you interfere, the trial is broken. She has to finish this. Alone. Then Sheila spoke. One sentence. Clear, quiet, and sharp as a shard of ice. You do not get to shape me with the lies you use to destroy them. Red Elk's face twitched. For just a moment, the mask slipped. Then she began to walk forward. Slowly, not to attack, to stand. Each step landed with the weight of thunder. Not rushed, not weak, rooted. You think power comes from silence, she said, her voice rising with every step. But power that is built on fear collapses the moment someone stops being afraid. She stood directly in front of him, her feet planted firm in the dust of the sacred circle. I stopped fearing you, she said, the moment I remembered my own name. The council watched, unmoving. Red Elk raised the knife. She didn't blink. The drumbeat slowed, and then he faltered. He took half a step back, just a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But in a trial of standing, that was enough. The elder rose to her feet. The challenger stands. The accused falters. Judgment is given. Red Elk's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He looked ready to strike, to kill her right there. But before he could move, Chessa had an arrow nocked and drawn. Jed had his rifle raised. The council guard stepped in, forming a wall between them. Red Elk backed away, his chest heaving. You think this ends me? He spat. It unmasks you, Sheila said, and that is worse. Amos spoke from the edge of the circle. You will have no more tribes to twist with your lies. Red Elk glared at them all, his eyes burning with hatred. Then I will build my own tribe. From the ash. He turned and stormed out of the lodge, his cloak dragging behind him like a dead thing. Sheila staggered slightly. Jed was there in an instant, catching her before she fell. You did it, he whispered. No, she replied, her voice shaky but firm. We just survived the beginning. Outside, the people waited, their faces a mixture of confusion, joy, and anger. The council emerged. The elder raised her staff. Let it be known, she declared, that Sheila, daughter of the moon shaman, has reclaimed her voice, her name, and her standing among the people. Red Elk is stripped of his title, his trust, and his honor. A roar went up from the crowd. Some of it was cheers, some of it was shouts of fury. The splinters of Red Elk's rage still echoed through his loyal followers. Jed turned to Chessa. He won't leave this quiet. No, Chessa said, his eyes on the horizon, and he will not leave alone. The final war had not yet come, but the match had just been struck. The snow came again that night. Soft and quiet. The kind of quiet that carries weight. It blanketed the council grounds, wrapping the trees in a silent white shroud, blurring the tracks of those who had left in anger. Red Elk had vanished, taking his most loyal warriors with him. No blood had been spilled in the trial, but everyone knew it was coming, not today, but soon. Inside the lodge, the fire burned low. Sheila sat beside it. Her back was straight, a blanket draped over her shoulders like a mantle she had never asked for, but now had to wear. Her eyes were fixed on the flames. Jed sat across from her, sharpening his knife more out of habit than necessity. Chessa stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the snow fall. You can feel it, Chessa said finally. The fracture. They'll rally around him, Jed said. Some out of loyalty, most out of fear. That's how tyrants stay warm, Chessa muttered. They burn the scared. Sheila hadn't spoken in over an hour. When she finally did, her voice was distant, as if it were traveling from a long way off. The people don't need another fire, she said. They need someone to tell them they are not alone. Jed stopped sharpening his knife. You think you're that person? She turned her eyes to him. I don't think. I know. He gave a small nod. Then I'll walk beside you, wherever that road leads. Chessa almost smirked. I suppose I'll have to keep you two from getting killed in the first 5 miles. The fire popped, and a log cracked in two. Sheila rose slowly and walked to the center of the room. My father believed in peace, she said, her voice growing stronger. But he stayed quiet when peace became a mask for fear. My mother believed in love, but she lost her voice when her love was twisted into a cage. I was born between those two silences. She looked at both of them, her eyes clear and fierce. I will not live in silence anymore. Jed stood up. So what now? We ride, Chessa said. We gather those who have had enough of being afraid. Not with swords, Sheila added. With the truth. She nodded. We don't fight to win a war. We fight so the next girl doesn't have to run barefoot through the snow to find her name. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Slow, relentless. They left before sunrise. Just the three of them at first. But word spread fast. In the first village, a woman with a burned hand joined them. Then an old warrior who had lost his tribe. Then 2 young boys who had seen too much war but still believed in something more than fear. Each person brought something with them, a story, a memory, a name that Red Elk had tried to erase. They moved from camp to camp. They didn't preach. They didn't demand loyalty. They just showed up. They stood. And they reminded people. And the people listened. Because when someone stands unbroken in the very place they were meant to be destroyed, others start to remember how to stand too. By spring, the ground had thawed. The air shifted. The wind no longer smelled of waiting. Red Elk returned, not with an army, but with chaos. He raided border camps, burned fields, and took what wasn't his, calling it justice. But the people no longer bowed their heads. They remembered. When he marched toward the old winter lodge, fire in his eyes, he did not find a people frozen in fear. He found fire pits already burning, voices already raised, a people already waiting. They didn't meet him with blades. They stood, 100 strong, led by the woman he thought he had broken. Sheila did not raise a weapon. She raised a hand, and in a voice that didn't need to shout to be heard across the valley, she told the truth. You cannot kill what you did not create, she said. And you did not create me. Red Elk looked around. He saw no support in the eyes of the people. Only stillness, only the weight of his own shadow, and like all tyrants who lose their crowd, he turned and fled. No one followed him. Months passed. Jed rebuilt his cabin, not high in the hills this time, but near the edge of the new village. It had a wide porch, 3 chairs, and a chimney that always smelled of pine and coffee. Chessa trained the young ones in the mornings and disappeared into the woods in the afternoons. He said little, but when he did, everyone listened. Sheila led by walking, by sitting in circles, by listening more than she spoke. The people brought her offerings, not of power, but of trust. One day, a young girl placed a small carved raven feather in her hand. For protection, the girl said, and because you remind me that I matter. Sheila held the feather close to her heart. That night, she sat with Jed on the porch of his new cabin, watching the stars. They keep calling me their leader, she said, but I don't want a throne. Jed smiled. Good. Thrones are just prisons you build for yourself. She laughed, a soft, easy sound. They watched the sky in comfortable silence for a while. Then she asked, Do you think it's over? He shook his head. No, but I think the worst part passed through us, and we didn't break. Sheila turned to him. So what do we do now? He looked up at the endless stars, then down at her, and a real smile touched his lips for the first time in years. We live, and in the quiet that followed, there was no fear, no silence, only the sound of healing, only the sound of a world being rewritten, not by war, but by those who were brave enough to remember who they really were. If you were Jed, would you have opened the door, or would you have left that girl in the snow? It's a question that keeps me up at night. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more strange, dark, and mysterious tales, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. Thanks for listening.